Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you, all of you. 2020, and still arguing about whether your skin color will determine the way you live or not. 1400 years ago, our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, witnessed a fight between two Muslims. Like one of them, his skin color is different from the others. And this is one of the very few moments that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was very sad. And he went very fast to this fight and said that, please drop it aside. It rottens. It rottens. 1400 years ago, our Prophet said, it rottens. This is rottens. دعوها إنها منتنة. In the honor of the memory of George Floyd and the stand for justice and peace. I'm inviting my guest today and thank him for joining me. He is the Executive Secretary of the Police Review and Advisory Board at the City of Cambridge and the Executive Director of the Cambridge Peace Commission as well. He is the senior nonprofit government professional with more than 25 years of experience in nonprofit management, development, fundraising, tech, and information communication. Constituent management has been employed by the City of Cambridge, Mass since April 2008. Our guest, Mr. Brian Corr, is also the immediate past president of the National Associations for the Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, nonprofit organization that works to enhance fair and professional law enforcement, something that we need those days, responsive if the community needs, increase accountability and transparency in policing, and building community trust through civilian oversight. Brian is a very good friend of mine as well, has served over at the board of directors since 2012 and served as the station vice president 2013, 2014, and of the vice presidents and served as a president from 2016 to 19. He served as a chair of the organization's strategic planning committee 2015 and 16, and served as a co-chair of the annual conference planning committee from 2012 to 2015. This is the professional stuff that I would like you to know about Brian. Two very personal stuff that I would like you to know about my guest today. Number one, he never missed an iftar when we called for iftar in our masajid. He's always there. And sometimes, like Jummah prayers, he used to pray within us in the middle, doing the exact same thing with us. People love him. Our community loves him. He comes with a peace. And the other thing, that he's a professional cyclist, someone that you cannot play with. Like he cycled like 25 miles, 30 miles. I enjoyed that. Brian, thank you for being with me. I really enjoyed your friendship for all those days. And I think you're the right person to be in our show today. So can you give like our viewers, a brief about the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement? What is that, and what is your role in it, and how it relates to the tragedy that's happening right now in our country?
Well, of course. Well, and first of all, thank you so much for having me here and for all those kind words. They're barely deserved, but it's a blessing for me to accompany you and your community on your path as we all work for a more just, humane world. So thank you for that. In terms of the National Organization for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, or NACOL as we call it. We are an association of people who are involved in police accountability and civilian oversight. And we include people who are, like myself, staff of cities and states who are doing oversight of police and law enforcement, looking at issues of potential misconduct, policy issues and problems, how to improve relationships with community. And we also have people who are board members, who are volunteers. We have law enforcement professionals who do work in things like internal affairs and policy development, as well as activists, Black Lives Matter people, academics, journalists. We have a wide range of people. And most years, for 25 years in a row, but not this year, we've brought up to 550 people together for a national conference where we do training, exchange information, and we do a lot of work on an ongoing basis to help communities that are looking at creating civilian oversight, whether they've had specific problems and challenges around police conduct and police accountability, or whether they're just working to be proactive and create something to avoid having problems. So civilian oversight is a broad field, includes many different types of people and different types of work, but at this point in our nation's history and at this particular moment, strategic thinking about how do we make change. There's a lot to be done in the wake of a specific incident, holding people accountable. But there's also the long-term work so that we don't keep having these incidents. It would be much better to create systems that don't cause oppression, that don't cause people in general, but especially people of color, immigrants, other minorities and people facing oppression, to create systems that don't cause those people to be victimized, but actually support and help all communities. So that's a big part of what we do at NACOL and Civilian Oversight, is we do address when problems happen, but we also work to create better, more professional law enforcement to make sure that police and law enforcement agencies are respectful and are responsive to the needs of the communities that they serve, that in fact they swear an oath to protect and serve. Our job is to help make sure that happens.
So thank you, Brian. I know that we have a list of questions that you and I agreed upon, but please allow me to go a little bit around that. So when you say that's a long road, how long this road should be?
Well, how long is the road to justice? It is something I think that on some level we constantly will work on. There will always be problems, there will always be challenges, we will always have to be addressing issues. But I think that when you look at specifically the history of the United States, we have this policing system that really comes from two things. One is what you will often hear about traditionally, which is the constable model in England and later the United Kingdom. Sir Robert Peel, the founder, as it were, of the London Metropolitan Police Department, where the police were really seen as members of the community who were given a special task. They weren't separate from. But we also have in this country a separate history, separate stream, which is of slave patrols, mostly in the South, but not only in the South, slave catchers. And these two streams have come together in our history with all of the other issues of oppression, slavery, racism, genocide, violence, militarism, that are the dark side of this country's history. And so it's always a mix of the positive and the negative. And so it takes a lot of work and it takes generations, because it's taken us hundreds of years to get to the place that we are. And so for us now to change things, it is a long road, because it's not simply one or two reforms or changing one or two laws, or even from my point of view, people who feel if we abolish the police and put resources into community, that will solve everything. But it's a much more complicated problem. And many of the communities that we'll see where they say they face the most over-policing are also the communities where people have the most need for safety and security. And many people would say it's not that they want no police, but they want police that are respectful, that are helping them, that care about them and work with them to solve problems in the way they want to be solved. So it's not an easy struggle, because it's part and parcel of the challenges we face in our society overall.
Awesome. Brian, let me ask you this. How do you personally feel about the murder of George Floyd? And was there anything different about this case that hit you the most? Because I know that this is not the first time that you lived many of those incidents. So what is so special about this case?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. No, it's very emotional. And I think to hold my emotion, hold on to my emotion, but still be a bit intellectual about it, I think there are at least three different aspects. One is the video itself. I often don't watch these videos. I find as a Black man, I can't just keep watching videos of Black men being killed, whether it's by the police or in other ways. And not only Black men, but I mean, I obviously identify strongly with that role and being a Black man. But the video, to just see calmness of the officer, the fact that other officers were standing, helping, not doing anything, helping the officer hold Mr. George Floyd down, and that you see him take his last breath on camera and nothing changed. That is particularly painful. So that is one piece. The second piece is the moment we're in a time of pandemic. This is a traumatic event unlike one that any of us on this planet at this time have lived through. There have been other pandemics, but not one where everywhere in the world is affected, where people from all walks of life and all types of societies are affected. And yes, certainly people who are dealing with other forms of repression are often more at risk, more affected, and more likely to die. But no one is completely immune from this virus and the effects. And the fact that people's lives have been disrupted, the fact that it has gone on. It's not the kind of traumatic event where something happens in a moment and then you work to recover. This is a traumatic event that is ongoing. We're still living in it. And we don't know how it will end, when it will end, how many will suffer. So all of that energy is in society. And I think that's part of why we've seen the reactions. And then the third piece is whatever someone's politics are, most of us would say that the last 3 years under our current president have been a time where there's been a particularly divisive set of rhetoric, and the images that we see, the conversations we have, there's very much a sense of two sides. There's our side and the other side. And our side is fighting for justice and the other side is unjust. And wherever one is in that belief, it's very difficult to connect with our fellow human beings when people are either good or evil. They're either on our side or opposed to us. And that, for me, those three things have come together in a uniquely painful way to create what we're seeing now. And that's why this is different for me personally.
Yeah, it is what it is. Polarization right now, it's at its peak. And actually, this is like, everyone can see that. To be frank, for an immigrant like me, I've never imagined that I will see this in the land of dreams and opportunities. However, it's happening, and it's a reality right now. So the issue that's probably the greatest right now with the public concern is with the policing, among many other concerns, is the use of force.
Yes.
The use of force. So what can we do about this issue? What are you doing about that?
Yeah, that's a very important question. So there are, again, a couple of aspects around use of force. One is what is permissible. Separate, the second issue is really what happens when there are abuses and excessive force is used. But the first issue that we have to look at as a society, and in the United States, this is done at the very local level. Every community has different laws, different standards, every state. There are almost 18,000 separate law enforcement agencies in the United States, in 50 states, in over 3,000 counties, and they all have different rules. They all have different standards. They all have different procedures and policies. And in some ways, that's one of the things about this country that creates strength, is a diversity, and people can set their own ways of doing things. It's also a weakness because you have all those police departments, most of them are very small. They don't have the resources to develop specialized training. They don't have the resources to stay on top of how people are doing. And then you have much larger departments. And of course, most of the time when we see these issues of police abuse, they are in larger areas, not always. And so use of force in particular, you have to start with looking at what the policies are, and that varies. In some places, the policies are publicly available and online. You can look at them and review them. In some places, community members, other parts of government are involved in developing policy and reviewing policy. I know here in Cambridge, I work for the Police Review and Advisory Board, and part of the work is reviewing and looking at policies, often in the wake of a specific complaint, but it can be at any time. And you've got that piece. The other piece is what happens when those policies are not followed. when you look at what happened with George Floyd's death, there's no department in the United States, I would say anywhere in countries that I'm aware of, that would have a policy that would allow you to kneel on someone's neck with your full body weight for almost 10 minutes. So in this case, policies clearly weren't followed, and you can, afterward, you can say what happened, you can put people on trial, you can fire people, but what we need to do is be proactive. And so we have to create training and systems where officers are trained well in the policy. The expectation is that they follow the policy. When there's deviation from policy, there's retraining, there's discipline, there's firing if necessary, and those policies have to be absolutely followed. There's always discretion in policing, but there can't be discretion in the use of potentially deadly force. When you have something where you're holding someone, it may not be considered deadly force, but clearly it can be deadly. So it's, from that structural point of view, those are the two pieces. And then in terms of community members, people should be asking what policies are. People should look at policies, and community members, government officials, elected officials, all need to be aware of what community policies are. And there are also lots of people who are experts in use of force. There are academics, there are researchers, but there are also organizations within the world of law enforcement. One in particular, Police Executive Research Forum, which is usually called PERF, is a group of relatively progressive police leaders who have lots of research. They do work on use of force, on legitimacy, which is basically the idea that people should be able to believe that the police department in their community is there to support and help them, and that they find that through their lived experience. Looking at issues of training, PERF is an organization that provides expertise in all of that. They have reports on their website, so there are lots of resources for people. There are also activists who are developing model policies around transforming policing, and there's a whole range of belief around that, but there are many ways for people to address this. But again, the key is to be proactive and to make sure that we have enforced policies that protect people.
I have like a question for you, but before asking this question, I have another question from one of our members in the community, Brother Abdullah Ashur, is saying that shouldn't all state reps call for action? Why are they silent if they represent us?
So that's an important question. And I'd say, as someone who also has done a lot of work in the political world, it's not as simple as it sounds, because in the world of legislation, it's a complicated process. There are various ways to make things happen. You can certainly call for action and say this is the truth and this is what needs to happen. But as an elected official, you also are there to work within the system and get things done. And I think the reality is different people can make different well-meaning, well-intentioned, educated, smart people can make different decisions about the way that they think they can be most effective.
Brian, but they make it look simple when during election times.
That is often the case. That is often the case. And I can't remember who said this, but a phrase I've heard many times is that elections are conducted in poetry and governing is conducted in prose. So when you're running for office, you speak about big ideas and beautiful things. And when you're doing the work of sitting in committee meetings and going to hearings and negotiating with people over how to get specific legislation passed, it's often much more complicated.
Brian, I know that you're very well connected and work very close with the police departments. And I know some of them, and they're awesome human beings. However, I need to know the impact of this trauma that happens on them. So what are what they are telling right now, like fellows and senior folks in the police departments. So what they are telling. So how does trauma affect them as human beings, not as a policeman?
Yes, so that's a very important question. And I would say, again, just we are very lucky here in Cambridge because We have a police department and actually a city government that has really looked at these issues. And the City of Cambridge Police Department has actually developed very specific training on looking at trauma. But I'll come back to that. But let me say that the issue of trauma is huge, and it affects law enforcement, it affects community members, I mean, it affects everybody. And the issues around trauma are everything from traumatic events that involve violence and fear and danger, to historical trauma, to the traumas of enslavement, to the traumas of genocide, interpersonal trauma, the trauma of people growing up in, unfortunately, abusive or neglectful families. And all of these things can combine. And so we have a world in which you have people who are dealing with their own personal trauma, people who are dealing with violence, perhaps, and then you have police officers and law enforcement officials who are dealing with that trauma from another perspective, who are going into potentially dangerous situations, not knowing what to expect, day after day after day. And in my experience, almost everyone that goes into that field goes in because they want to help, much like social workers or teachers or doctors. They may have seen injustice in their own lives and felt that this is a way that they can make things right, whether it was crime or violence or something else. And yet the experience that they have of dealing with people often on the very worst day of that person's life, whether they're a victim of a crime or someone who's done something horrible, and they do this constantly. And the traditional culture of policing, like many, has been a sort of macho, almost military culture where you're tough, you don't show weakness, you stand up, and then you don't talk about it. And so that culture has to change. And that's part of what there's effort around the country. And as I said, Cambridge has been a leader in this. But more and more police departments are looking at having their officers understand the nature of trauma, how people react to traumatic events, how people who have experiences with trauma in the past can, I won't say, it's not that they relive them, but they react based on
Are they
that past
allowed to take
trauma.
sides? Are police allowed to take sides?
I mean, if there's a conflict that they experience,
No, if
or
like if they seen that's but if Floyd's death, are they allowed to say that, hey, this is a wrong act, or no, they have to support the system?
Well, in fact, their duty as police officers is to follow the law and do the right thing. So, I mean, from a legal point of view, there's still work to be done. So you can't say legally that these officers broke the law, but the reason that those officers were fired by the Minneapolis police chief, the ones who were bystanders, was because they did not do their duty. Their duty was to intervene and stop the officer who ended up killing Mr. George Floyd. And they did not do that. So they absolutely have duty to intervene. And in fact, there's a program that's been developed out of New Orleans, which has a long history of problematic policing and police violence. That program is called EPIC, EPIC. Ethical Policing is Courageous. And now for about 4 years, they've trained all of their officers and continue to retrain them in, when you see something go wrong, you step up and you intervene. And that can be anything from just going up to an officer and touching them on the arm and saying, hey, I got this. If someone seems like they're getting upset, to physically intervening and breaking things up. And that training actually was created by a combination of community activists, psychologists, and someone who was actually a survivor of the Holocaust before and during World War II, who had done research on what made the guards of the concentration camps in Germany just stand there and not do anything, and what could have changed that. And from his research, he was able to develop techniques to train people to get involved, rather than do what is so common, to stand by and watch your colleagues do the wrong thing because you don't want to get involved, you don't want to be the odd person out, to stand up and say that's wrong and take
I hate to
action.
interrupt you, Brian, but I have like a question. Like, how
Of
can
course.
individuals, citizens, and good citizens demand justice and be heard without engaging in violence?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm the director of the Peace Commission, so I do believe in peace, and I believe that in the end, violence begets more violence. So I think that as frustrating as it can be, people should protest peacefully. They can raise their voices. They should let their position be known. They should work through government. They should lobby their elected officials. They should vote for people who will work for change. They should run for office. They should get involved. And they should also support people who are working for change. So much of it is when people are suffering, they need to know that people support them. So that helps people stand up for their own rights. That helps people recover from what they may have been through. But it's really doing everything in all these different levels. There's no one thing that will fix it. Protest alone won't fix it. Elections alone won't fix it. Holding police accountable when they do wrong won't fix it alone. We need all of these different aspects happening. And we need people to speak up, because ultimately the police work for the community and government works for the community. All of us are servants. And if we don't recognize that we answer to something higher, and both that we answer to something higher in terms of the community, but we have a higher moral code. There's a higher power that we need to be accountable to. And in everything we do, in all of our work, whoever we are, in whatever place we have in society, we have to do the right thing, and we have to find what is our piece that will create more justice. So people
Brian,
can and should take action.
do you think those sad incidents will happen again?
Hopefully, no. But I think the reality is we live in a world with billions and billions of people. There's still huge amounts of oppression. There are hundreds of years just in this society of history that leads to unfairness, a lack of opportunity, poverty, trauma, multi-generational trauma. And we still have police systems and individual police officers who do not do the right thing all the time. So unfortunately, I wish I could say that this is the last time we will see something like this, but I'm afraid that just like everything else,
okay,
it will continue.
This is very pragmatic. Yeah,
we can make it better.
Yeah.
No,
so, like right now, we're in the lockdown. People are staying homes, and all of a sudden, people are in the streets. So, is this virus thing real, or like why people in the streets? And like, how do you see that? How do you see that's the rights, and at the same time, like, no, guys, like they're spreading the virus. So, what is the truth here?
That's a great question. So in my past life, I have a science background. So I've worked, I mean, it's in chemistry, but I do understand the ideas of science and the foundation. So I have followed this very carefully. And so first of all, the virus is real. People are dying. People are getting sick. We know that more people have died than we've been able to count, because not everyone's been tested. And at the peak of the epidemic in different places here around the world, there were people who died and were buried without ever being tested. So US is real. The second piece is that people are frustrated. People are having a hard time being inside. People are feeling trapped. And I am very afraid, and I think that unfortunately some of these protests, just because people are gathering together, will spread the virus. It's a bit unusual compared to many viruses, in that current scientific knowledge tells us that people can have the virus and be infected. It's growing in their system. You know, the virus is multiplying, but they have no symptoms, and then they can transmit that virus to other people. It's very infectious as viruses go, and it doesn't. Thankfully, it's not lethal for everyone, but that means that many people have the virus. Some never develop symptoms, and it spreads very quickly, which is part of why when it first happened that the virus existed, people were thinking, oh, well, if we just stop people from coming from China where the virus is, or if we just test people and see if they have a temperature and have symptoms, then we'll know. But unfortunately, what we now know is that people who have the virus can spread it before there's any awareness that they have it. And they may never even know they had it because they may not get sick. So,
yeah.
yes, I
Yeah,
could go
Brian.
on and on.
No, I know. Thank you very much. Actually, I would like to close the show with a very positive thought, which is, you know what? The coming generations, like my children, my kids are living here. They have friends. They have very close friends, and getting them doesn't depend on their religion or skin of color or where they are from.
Mhm,
So the positive things that the coming generation are different. They
mhm,
accept regardless of anything. They build bonds and connections regardless of anything. They deal
mhm,
with the human and the heart of the human being next to them. So I think if we, as a generation,
mhm,
failed in our struggle to bring justice to this, I think the hope is in our kids and the generation coming. I think they are different than us, and the
mhm,
way that we are using, they're using other thoughts. And while
mhm,
we might look pretending that we accept, they genuinely accept. They genuinely
mhm.
accept. The next generation genuinely accept each other, and this is the hope for the change that we look for the better. Thank you, Brian, for being with us, sharing this beautiful insight. We all wish that everything, hopefully, that will settle and justice will be served. And as a reminder again, not to be judged on a skin of color or race or religion or where you come from, except your righteousness and your good acts and deeds. Thank you very much for being with us, Brian. We really appreciate that. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and inshallah, I will have a chance to join you again this way.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Bye bye.
Alaikum salam.